Do what you gotta do, man. Find a way to get some cash.
The earlier you do it, the longer you hold for, the better these compound growth numbers come out.
Find a way, get creative. It's not impossible. We live in an economy where you can make lots and lots of money just on your phone if you really wanted to. There are means to do it, no matter how hard it is.
I think there could be some fundamental changes that might slow the growth rates of assets down, like in the next 20, 30 years.
The property just sits there, earns me some income, pays the mortgage, pays the bills. There are a lot of property millionaires all across Australia right now. They did something very, very simple. In this episode, we're going to go through exactly how to get rich, very rich, enough for you to go chill out on the beach and spend time doing the things that you actually want to do very slowly and very easily. Property is a very, very powerful tool for you to accumulate wealth over time, and that wealth can easily translate into the income you need to support your lifestyle. We're going to go through the numbers behind a get-rich slow strategy. Kurt, how are you?
Pretty good. The get-rich boring strategy. Is
that what I call it? Get-rich
exciting,
boring.
But this is useful.
Yeah, it's very, very simple. Let's just start with the context here, where it's just we meet people all the time, anyone old, basically. Let's just sum it up. I'm 35 now, so I should probably rephrase that because I'm repeatedly being told I'm old by my daughter at the moment right now. So let's rephrase that to anyone above 50. 50?
Yeah.
60?
60? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting too close to 50 to say that now. So let's call it 50 to 60, right? Anyone in and around there. If you've bought a home, you are probably in the property millionaire club, right? Is that fair to say?
Yep. If you've held it for 20 years, if you bought it in your 20s or your 30s and you've held the property for that period of time, depending on where it is, but somewhere in Australia, highly likely you're in that club.
Exactly. So the foundational point to the get rich boring way is buy property, hold that property over time. In this episode, what we're going to go through is the numbers behind it and exactly what you need to do if you are in this position. I'm trying to make this as simple as I can for the audience. How can you get wealthy simply? That's really, really it. So, Kurt, can we run through this scenario that we've, drawn up together? I know you're just looking at it at the moment. So let's run through it.
We've mapped out a 25-year horizon. So if you are going to acquire some property assets, basically, how does it look over a 25-year period?
Yep.
We've done it as a 2 million portfolio, so 4 500K investments, but basically 2 million of asset value.
Yes.
That you have 20% deposit, and you have 1.6 million of debt, and you've contributed the 400.
So you probably need $500,000 to be able to get this. So you don't need this $2 million asset base straight away, right? Yep. You can. I've talked about it on a few different episodes here about my own journey. I began with 35 grand starting out. Yeah, I didn't have $500,000. Not many Australians.
Yeah, so you've grown the portfolio to the point where you're sitting on around about 2 million of assets.
Exactly.
But leveraged. You didn't just buy it with cash. You've got 1.6 million of debt, but you've got yourself to 2 million of property assets.
Exactly. That $1.6 million debt in this equation could be higher. It's okay. The numbers don't change that much if that was $2 million in debt as well. So the key to this is, the starting point to this is, get yourself to an asset position of roughly $2 million. That's the plan. That's what you need to do in terms of the steps to execute this plan. Is that right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. How? Let me add in the anecdote of how you can do this. I did it with 35 grand to begin with. So save 35 grand. That bit sucked. That was 2-minute noodles, sports betting. I said that a few times. That one, I've copped some heat. Do what you got to do, man. Find a way to get some cash. That is the hardest part to the journey. Yes, living standards are hard. This cost of living crisis. It's hard, right? But find a way. Get creative. It's not impossible. We live in an economy where you can make lots and lots of money just on your phone if you really wanted to. There are means to do it, no matter how hard it is. And it's easier today to do that than it has ever been. That's a brutal reality, but it is, because there's more opportunity today than there has ever been, regardless of your circumstances. And I'm testament to that. You can find a way to increase your earnings and increase your deposit size if you really wanted to. So find a way to get your first little bit. You don't need $500,000. Once you've got that first little bit, you got to accelerate it really quickly. This is where I got lucky, and this is the bit that you don't need, where I put it into a property and that property increased in value really, really quickly, then bought another couple of properties and it increased in value really, really quickly. And then over a 3-5 year period, I had about $500,000 in wealth created from purchasing assets with the smaller amount that I had to begin with.
Yep. And the amount of time it takes to kind of get to that $2 million portfolio depends like a little bit on your income earning, which assets you choose, bit of luck involved. So it can happen, obviously, the quicker it happens, the better. Yep. But like we're looking at once you kind of get to that position, then what does the kind of accumulate wealth in a boring hold pattern look like?
For sure. I love this. This is so cool. It's just a chilled out way to do it. You don't need to get too complicated. We talk about so many complicated strategies. In fact, we're about to go through one next after this episode. Complicated strategy, advanced way of getting it done. But you don't need to. You got to just find a way to execute this plan. Get to $2 million in property assets as quickly as you can and allow yourself 25 years of living to get there. So, live for 25 years. That's step 2, right?
Yep.
Is that it?
Pretty much, yeah. And it's kind of, I think that's a good summary, is the hardest, or the key thing is to kind of like get off the ground, if that makes sense. Like get the plane in the air.
Yes.
Like you can be very aggressive, you can try chill out and just cruise, but like you need to get the plane off the ground. Like that's all of the results start to look good there.
Another reason why I like this concept is we have a lot of friends. We have the conversation I had just before walking into this podcast studio was with a person who had, saved his way. He was 35, went to school with him, saved his way to a certain position. He'd actually bought a property asset in 2014 that had pretty much doubled. So he'd done really, really well for himself there, created the foundational base, but he hadn't done much more since then. And he had saved his way to buying that deposit to begin with. He did it for about 6-7 years beforehand. And then he'd now almost paid it off just from additional savings from his job. Great, healthy position. Now, if he executes this very simple plan where he uses that equity there and the borrowing power that he has to go buy $2 million worth of more assets.
Yep, investment assets,
Of investment assets, then he's going to be sitting on these numbers that we're about to go through. So you could be in this position where it's just like, what do you need to do? The simple thing that you need to do is get to that $2 million asset base somehow, and that simplifies it and crystallizes it a little bit clearly. Now, if I did do that, show me the money. What happens?
So, how much does your $2 million go up each year? That's kind of where the assumptions are, basically. So, we've gone and taken the historical dwelling growth rate, which is 6.8%.
6.8%.
Which is pretty chunky.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's really compounding over the 25 years is where you're coming from. We've also got a 5% gross yield on the initial purchase prices as well.
Yep.
So they're the two variables that we're plugging in that are growing, or particularly the 6.8% that are growing the portfolio each year in this kind of 25-year journey.
I think I put that 5% in there, Kurt, mainly for one reason. I just put it in there because if you're going to sit on this and sleep on it and just let it do its thing, you got to make sure that this property isn't costing you money to hold. Now, we are sitting here in July 2025, and getting a 5% yield will mean that property will cost you money to hold. But over the next 30 years, I picked a yield where I'm like, okay, this property will be positively geared over a 25-year time period.
Yep.
Rents will increase, the debt level we're assuming stays the same. Interest rates will likely normalize the borrow rate for an investment loan over that time period. 5% sounds roughly right in and around there. We're at 5.75 now, so in that vicinity, and there's a couple of rate cuts coming.
Yeah,
so
assume over that 25-year period there'll be points where you can negatively gear it against your personal income. It's probably a number that you're not going to be burning massive cash outflows just to stay afloat.
Yep. I suspect you're going to be in a slight positive position. That's why I use that. That's the only point of that 5% yield. You don't need a 5% yield, but you want to make it as easy as possible. And this is the get rich boring program that I'm talking about. The boring way is you can't be funding it from your cash flow and then finding a way to just hold your property assets. That's hard. I want to do it boringly. Boringly is the property just sits there, earns me some income, pays the mortgage, pays the bills, doesn't pay me anything right now because I don't need it to, but it just sits there.
Takes care of itself.
Taking care of itself, right? So I need to buy four $500,000 assets, three 650 assets roughly.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. So if you pull that off and we map out that 6.8 growth rate over 25 years.
Hang on.
Where do you land?
I wonder if the mics heard that. Where do we land?
$10 million.
$10 million
asset value.
What? No way.
That's the compound growth over 25 years.
Yeah, I got a bit too excited. Everyone's here being like, whoa, my eardrum just burst. But he did say that right. $10 million.
Yep, your 2 million asset value turns into 10.
Everyone's listening to this being like, these guys are crazy. They don't know how to do math. We sure the math is right? Let me check if the math that we're doing is math. And you keep going.
So, yeah. Oh, and that's, like you say, for historically, how there's so many property millionaires in Australia is if you go back 25 years, it's the same story. So, yeah, 6.8% growth rate, 25 years, 2 million asset value turns into 10 million asset value.
Yep.
We've assumed that you never pay off the debt. Like, let's just say it was interest-only loans and you've got the 1.6 there. You never used your cash flow or your income to pay that off. So that still means that you've got a capital gain of effectively 8 million.
Yep.
And kind of like a net gain of 6.4 when you subtract off like the debt that you never cleared.
Can anyone see my screen? No one could actually see the screen. But there's a lot of digits there. There's obviously decimal points there. But that says $10,358,000, 844 cents. You're welcome, everyone. You're welcome. I retire. We're just done here. Like, all you got to do is buy $2 million in assets and then you have $10 million. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. 25 years later, though. But yeah.
25. Yeah. Details. It's boring. It's crazy, though, right? Like,
a little, but that's also the historical story of Australian property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why all these people have millions of dollars today. Because if you did the math, go back 25 years ago, you didn't need to buy $2 million worth of assets then. You needed to buy like $50,000 worth of assets 25 years ago. And that $50,000 is now $2 million. And it's just like, hallelujah, I've got all this cash, right? Like actual cash in today's dollars. That's kind of where everyone's at. Roughly, that's a fair summary, right?
That's a pretty fair summary. So I think that like it's like the boring get rich scheme is like if you can just hold solid growth assets, like to some extent you could probably see some similar numbers in like the stock market and things like that. But in Australia, the ability to leverage against property and kind of, acquire 2 million of assets with 1.6 million of debt, and then have that compound growth year on year on year. That's what does the heavy lifting.
Pretty cool. So what's that worth? Did we go through that? What's $10 million actually like? Money is just like an invented concept. What am I actually buying? Am I buying like, milk with $10 million or like how much money is $10 million in the year?
Yeah. So if you net present value it back to like what it looks like, in 2025 when you bought it.
Getting more than lollipops and milk?
How much should be netting?
How much is a Big Mac?
You should be netting 3 million. So you've acquired a 2 million asset base.
Yep.
And then in 25 years' time,
what's the actual number? We've got it written down here, right? I thought it was a bit more than 3.
3.47.
3.47. So nearly $3.5 million.
Like inflation adjusted, and that's after clearing all the liabilities, paying tax. Like that's your net outcome is you've acquired 2 million of assets, 1.6 million of debt.
Yep.
You've let it grow for 25 years on the historical growth rate. You're netting 3.47.
So doing some basic math there. Buy $2 million worth of assets, 6.8% growth rate for 25 years. That's the previous 30 years, just assumed for the next 30 years. We'll talk about that next. That $2 million asset base is worth $10.3 million, $10.4 million in the year 2050. In 25 years. That $10.4 million, you would then sell your total gain that you've made, after $8 million worth of gain. You'd pay a bunch of tax on. You'd pay about $2 million in tax.
Yep.
So half of it will be tax-free, CGT discount, and then the other half you'll pay tax on.
Yep.
And, assuming a 50% marginal tax rate, roughly around there. Maybe marginal tax rate's like 80% by then, but let's just assume 50% for now, roughly, whatever it is. You pay roughly $2 million in tax. That gets you to 8-ish. Have I got that right? Clear off the debt. That gets you to about $6 million.
Yep.
In total
proceeds
available after you've paid your taxes and after you've paid off the debt. That $6 million is actually worth 3.5.
Yep. Yeah. It's roughly 6.4 turns to 3.4 when you discount it back for 25 years of reverse inflation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So this is where you could actually get rich. Is $3.5 million rich? What does it actually give you? What does $3.5 million, if I go put $3.5 million into a bank account or a US Treasury, maybe US Treasuries aren't the right investment by then.
Yeah, some kind of annuity though, but like...
Let's buy some sort of bond.
So if you got 4% on it,
yeah,
then you're looking at roughly 140K of like annual income that you generate out of that 3.4 million.
Yeah, let's say you got 5%. So yeah, between 140 to 200 grand. Like if you get a 4 to 6% yield.
Yep, yield you get.
In today's dollars.
In today's dollars. So you've turned your 2 million of assets has turned into a 140-ish K
There's your
annual
salary
income
replacement. There's your salary replacement, everyone. There's your retirement play. Beats the pension. I'm pretty sure the pension's like 30 grand or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, you've got like 6 times that.
Given it's 25 years, I don't know how much of a salary replacement it is, but it's a great retirement play to be like, yeah, when you do like want to retire, it's like you just keep rolling.
Exactly. This is like, you know, for what we're talking about. We're talking to everyone under the age of like 45.
Yeah.
And you can toggle the numbers around, you know, you can increase what you need to do. But if you're under the age of 45 and you have time to go and work with, this is a simple plan that would work for you that can likely give you a well above average standard of living into retirement, a very comfortable retirement going forward. And yeah, if you're younger, then maybe your retirement happens a bit earlier. Like maybe you get an extra decade or two to be on the golf course practicing your golf swing. Okay, I imagine you're looking at this being like, yeah, wouldn't mind that.
Yeah. So what's the like risks, I guess, of this? Like the key, because when I'm like looking at the numbers, the sad part, you don't like the risk part.
I was having fun with the $10 million number. Now it's the truth. We want to share everything behind this. So what have we got here? What are the catches?
Well, the 6.8%, that's the historical growth rate. So there's a bit of a judgment call as to, is that going to continue in the future?
What do you think about that? How do people buy these homes?
I think there's some risks on the downside of that number.
Yep.
But it's very speculative to say. So like I can see with AI, I think there could be some fundamental changes that might slow the growth rates of assets down, like in the next 20, 30 years, potentially. But I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that with any great certainty. Like maybe it could go the other way as well.
Let's segue into this a little bit because you touched on this, right? So I've been thinking a lot about this AI thing. Maybe we'll do another podcast on it again and talk through it. This is my broad assumptions. The world goes through the biggest productivity boom in history. The world goes through the biggest income boom associated with that productivity boom in history. The world has its greatest growth cycle in history. These 3 things all correlate with each other. Productivity, income, growth. They are all the underlying drivers of growth. At exactly the same time, the world gets unemployed together as well. And governments get very, very rich as well because technically the size of the pie goes from this, if you think of the global economy as this, to this quickly while it's been going from like this to this, and then back down. Like basically hasn't changed in 30, 40 years. Now that may be quite positive for property as well. Like yes, distributionally, individuals may not have as much, but the size of the pie is larger. And in Australia, here's the unique factor of Australia and probably the underlying reason why growth rates in Australia will be fairly strong is in 25 years, we're going to have a lot more people in this country. We are still a baby little toddler country that's like learning to walk, and soon enough Australia is like growing up and being like, hey, I'm a kid now, I'm ready for school. Like, you know, the rest of the world is, many parts of the developed world are in the reverse situation.
Yeah, going backwards.
Yeah. Australia's not going to have problems. This is what I've learned from COVID and all the nonsense where people said Australia is an undesirable country. Australia will only increasingly be the most desirable country in the world to live in, which means it attracts the best of the best, gets more and more people here. No matter what tax rate settings and, you know, whatever the business councils of Australia want to say, people want to live here. It's the best in the world and we have more time. So there's some underlying strengths here as well that might even increase this.
Yeah, and population growth is, I would say, surprisingly key. Like that was one of my takeouts of like Econ 101 when they teach you those growth models, and they're like the only things really that drive long-term growth are like technological change and population growth.
Both of those things are extremely positive in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. But like you say, compared to some parts of Europe and other countries where, or Japan, where there's not that population growth isn't present, it's a good way to solve problems, basically, and one that we've been using realistically for a while, given like low productivity.
Yeah. When you talk 25 years, you get to get away from the short-termisms. Like, people are afraid of, ridiculous unemployment rates from AI changes. Short-termism, that could cause problems. Long-termism, when you're like, actually, what's the actual change? Those are the changes that you have. Technological change, driving up productivity rates, income rates, and the growth potential of an economy. Population growth story in Australia, really positive. And typically it's also been our solve. Like, it's been
population growth, definitely.
It's been our solve of these transitionary issues. And what's not to say that if people are unemployed and not working in these sectors, what's not to say the government's not going to be like, 400,000 migrants, why don't we make it 1 million migrants this year? Like, let's bring in more people, because if we're bringing more people, they need houses. What can we do with our workforce that no longer sits on their computer doing tap, 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 because, AI agents are doing that? They can build homes. We can build plumbers. We can be electricians. We can be tradies. Like, that's typically been our growth formula. So what's to say that doesn't continue?
Yeah, and if you go from a 27 million population to a 40 million population or a 50 million population, regardless of how it's distributed, that's just a big increase in aggregate demand, right? Like,
beauty.
Yeah.
We might be able to afford it too. Yeah. Because we just touched on what should happen. Income levels should dramatically rise as well if this transitionary change, if those things are true, if AI is the potential that if it becomes that and realizes itself there, which should mean that countries
you're looking at
richer.
Like a second industrial revolution kind of thing. Yeah. It's just an AI one. Yeah.
It's huge. So that should increase income. So there's potential there. I don't really know the answer to this. We don't know the answer to this. But long term, I feel like property will grow. I don't know its growth rate. The best guide that we have here is history.
Yeah.
Especially over these sort of time periods. And even if you cut it down a little bit, you'll just be extending the time out a little bit further. You just need it to grow above inflation. Well, probably don't even need that, but ideally it's growing above inflation for that time period.
Yeah, and the general principles are: one, you've managed to acquire a relatively significant asset base.
Yep.
Like you've hit a critical mass, right, of like asset value that can then grow. With property, you're able to do it with a little bit of leverage. So like you don't have to go in with cash. So like there's ways to get to that critical mass faster.
Yep.
And then you're just sitting on it.
For sure. So how would I do this? Now let me help you execute. If I'm sitting on low amounts of capital, find a way to purchase a property in an area that's going to rise in value quickly. If I'm sitting on 120 grand, I'd probably be buying in and around a growth market. We've touched on a number of those with Adi on this podcast and with Kurt. Increasing that 100K closer to 500K. The goal here is you need $500,000 roughly in equity to be created to get our $2 million borrowing capacity purchasing done. I'd also be exploring lending strategies to help me get to this $2 million capacity. What sort of income do I need to actually go and get it? I'd be working with brokers. I think you could probably tell me this pretty quickly, run through the numbers and work out what's actually happening. Again, I did that on a call where we had to unpack being like, this was his number as well, $2 million, the asset base. We talked through what it looks like and we found a way to work out the exact lending strategy to get him there and the balance of the type of structures that he'd need and when he would need those structures to achieve that goal. So you can reverse engineer all of that and map that out with just the strategic lens when you're working through it. That's really it. Have I?
Yeah, you do the hardest
this
parts.
This is boring.
Yeah, the hardest parts of this are normally always at the start, which makes sense. This whole strategy is built around doing some heavy lifting early, finding a way to get yourself to a bit of an investment asset base that you then hold. And you get to do the boring part. Like I don't think there's any way to achieve any of these outcomes without having to do some heavy lifting at some point. I think what these numbers illustrate is that if you're able to do the heavy lifting slightly earlier, get yourself to this point and then hold, the earlier you do it, the longer you hold for, the better these compound like growth numbers come out.
For sure. So I will talk through more risks. So growth rates being a little bit lower than 6.8%. We talked about that a little bit. Maybe it will be, maybe it'll be more. Who knows? Either which way, I think it's long-term, fairly low risk anyway. Ability to hold the property. So again, I picked a 5% yield for a reason. Like that kind of navigates that risk largely. The property itself, you got to make sure it's there,
insured
and is in condition to last for that time period, and earns rental income and can be tenanted out. So this is the property selection part of that process to ensure that you go and get that. That doesn't mean go buy a build or a shiny new build that lasts 25 years. It means you still need to get your property selection right. You can really stuff that up too. What else is there?
Yeah, interest rates. So, interest rates could spike, which again, unlikely to spike for a whole 25-year period. But it's all these risks, I would say, are how do you navigate particular periods over the 25 years where there's going to be 18 months, 2 years where it's going to be slightly painful to hold. So whether that be, property needs repairs, interest rates are unusually high for a little window.
So keep $100,000 to the side, basically.
Yeah.
You need $2.1 million. We've changed the number.
Yeah. And then there's a bit of luck involved. Yeah. If that comes at if that slightly difficult 18-month window comes at a time where you've got some surplus cash flow in your life, then it might be easier. If it comes the day after you buy the property and you've burnt all your cash, then it's probably going to suck a little bit. But
you might even get it from the property as well. Like it could be positively geared over a time period, and you could easily have, if you've got $2 million in assets and you're at a 2% positive spread, let's just say we had a 3% interest rate environment, or 2.5%, like the COVID period, right? You could easily have banked up $50,000 in just savings during that period that offsets high interest rate periods.
But there's going to be some small windows where it's going to be painful, so you ideally have some buffers or some way to navigate that period, which ideally, like you say, offset you. There's going to be some periods where it's more favorable to hold too. So if you budget and you offset the two, then you should be all right. But that's the risks is something happens that forces you to liquidate the assets before you've got to the 25 years. Like if you liquidate after 3 years, that's very, very different compound growth to liquidating after 25, unless you're reinvesting.
Another risk that we talked about, which we'll also talk about in another podcast. It's going to be a fun one, and this one's going to align well with it. One of my most common conversations now is your property that you're purchasing must align with your property strategy and the strategy that you're actually trying to go with and what you're actually trying to achieve. So property must match that. The lending must also match that. We're talking about this right now. We're offering a property strategy, a very simple one that will probably apply to the majority of our audience that are listening. The simplest one, the get rich boring one, right? That's the property strategy. Now, if you're buying over a 25-year time horizon and you have the capital already there to buy your $2 million worth of assets, you probably don't want to be buying in areas that have lower 25-year growth rates. Many regional pockets, some areas that don't exhibit the profile there, that don't have that population growth story or have so much uncertainty. You may want the resilience of the long-term-ism to certain locations that have that longer-term growth rate trajectory too. So you want to make sure your property is matching up with your $2 million borrowing power. And then the lending strategy is how are you going to get to this $2 million if that's what you need to get to. So that's going to be based around your income and your position that you have to be able to hold on to $2 million of assets. There's probably a structuring element there as well, depending on the nature of your jobs and the risks that you take there as well, and whether certain structures support you or not. So this is mirroring these three. We're talking about the property strategy component, that bucket to the whole property game. You want to mirror those three up. So get your property selection right to match this.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation we have a lot too, and the nice part about running through these numbers is doing more complex investing isn't the only way to land a pretty nice end result. Like there's, ways to try and turbocharge this even further if you want to get more aggressive, but a nice, boring, conservative route also can land you at, what did we work out? 140K of like passive income that you can retire on. So just from the doing a little bit of heavy lifting early and then letting basically property in Australia do its thing.
For sure. There you have it. The Get Rich Boring program. Buy $2 million worth of assets, let it sit there for 25 years, do nothing else, and you will have a pretty nice retirement. That is what you need to do, and we've unpacked exactly how the numbers work here and what you need to do step by step to achieve this Get Rich Boring program.